This is lecture 15 in our hermeneutics course, and in this lecture and next lecture, we will look at various literary genres. Genre, G-E-N-R-E, is just a fancy word for types of literature. The four principles of interpretation that we looked at in our several previous lectures should be used with all types of passages. No literary genre should allow us to strike out, delete any of these four rules of interpretation. They're valid in all types of literature. But nevertheless, different types of literature have different characteristics, and it's good to understand those. And some of this is quite obvious, but some of it's not as obvious. So let's think about this. The Word of God was given to us as it's a written Word of God. It's literature. And literature necessarily comes in different types. And the Bible indeed has different types of literature. So we should understand which literary genre we are in as we study a particular text. That may help us to treat it well. What is the literary genre of our passage? Here's a list of some literary genres. Epistle, poetry, history, law, prophecy, biography, apocalyptic, parable, proverb. Each of these kinds of literature has its own special characteristics and needs to be interpreted accordingly. So in this lecture, we'll just look at one important genre in the Gospels, the genre called parable. A parable is a brief story. The story doesn't actually have to be true. There may or may not have been a farmer that actually went out to sow his seed and actually threw his seed on 4 different types of soil. That doesn't matter. It's not a story about a historical event. A parable is a brief story that illustrates a moral principle, a theological principle. If parables are not observed well and interpreted carefully, parables can become an opportunity for strange interpretations, but they also can bring powerful communication. At the same time, we read in the Gospels that sometimes the Lord taught in parables to hide truths. So when we interpret parables, we don't push for every detail to have an element in the interpretation. Some of the details are just there to establish the setting or heighten the vividness of a passage. Remember the situation of the original hearers. The Lord himself used many parables in his teachings in the Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Parables can jolt us by using basic ethics like right and wrong, justice and mercy, love and compassion, and a parable can bypass people's defenses. Certainly the prophet Nathan bypassed King David's defenses when he ended his parable and said, "You are the man." Parables support clear doctrines, but because they can be difficult to interpret, parables should not be used to prove doctrines. You're in dangerous territory if you have only parables to prove your doctrine. Yeah, we should question a doctrine like that. Before we would want to look at the parables of Matthew 13, we should study their context. Note in Matthew 12:24, "Now when the Pharisees heard, they said, 'This one only casts out demons by Beelzebul, the prince of demons.'" That statement of rejection sets the stage, launches the parables of Matthew 13. Matthew, as we mentioned earlier in the laws of structure, Matthew 12:24 is a pivot in the development of the Gospel of Matthew. At that point, the leaders of the nation have decided against the Lord. There and then he begins to use parables, hiding and revealing truth at the same time, hiding the truth from those that reject him, and revealing truth to those that believed in him. Now, Matthew 13, 3 through 9, and its explanation in Matthew 13, 18 through 23, provide for us a model in interpreting parables. This is the end of our lecture 15, which is the beginning of the discussion on genres and a brief look at the genre of parable.